The house was too quiet for a birthday. The kind of quiet that hums in your bones, whispering what you already know. No one's coming. She lit one candle on a cupcake, not because she wanted to, but because old habits die harder than hope. The flame flickered against the family photos on the wall. Smiling faces frozen in time. People who once promised I'd never forget her. A single tear slipped down her cheek, not from sadness, but acceptance. 10 years. 10 birthdays. 10 silent phones. She looked at the clock. 8:03 p.m. The day was almost over, and so was pretending. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and whispered to the flame, "Happy birthday, Eleanor." The candle trembled, and in that soft glow, something in her heart finally went out. She woke to sunlight that didn't feel like morning. Her phone sat on the table, silent. Not a single message, not even a belated. She scrolled through old photos, the ones where they all crowded around her cake, laughing, smudging icing on her cheeks. The ache that followed wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull, practiced. She set the phone down and went to water her plants, the only things that still grew under her care. In the kitchen sink, a single fork gleamed beside an empty plate. She remembered how birthdays used to mean noise, laughter, the smell of frosting. Now it was just leftovers and silence. She laughed to herself. Not bitterly, just softly, like someone remembering a dream they know won't come back. Later that day, she walked to the mailbox, a routine that gave her days a rhythm. Bills, flyers. Nothing personal, but buried in the pile, a letter from her lawyer, Mr. Fletcher, a reminder about updating her will. She held it for a long time, eyes narrowing with thought. Maybe it was time. That night she sat at her desk, letter open beside her, pen in hand. A calm resolve washed over her. She'd spent years hoping to be remembered. Now she would make sure she was, but on her own terms. The pen touched paper, and with every stroke she rewrote her story. The letter stayed on her desk for days, like a quiet dare. Eleanor couldn't help but drift back to the birthdays when her home overflowed with laughter. She remembered little hands tugging at her skirt, frosting-stained smiles, and her husband pretending he'd baked cake himself. The sound of those years still echoed in her mind, even now, muffled by time and law. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. Her family hadn't just forgotten her birthday, they'd forgotten her. She closed her eyes, and the kitchen came alive again, laughter bouncing off the walls, her husband's arm around her shoulders, the kids running in with handmade cards, the smell of vanilla cake and candles. Then, as quickly as it came, it vanished, replaced by silence and dust. The past felt so vivid it hurt. When her husband died, she thought grief would bring them closer. Instead, it built walls. Daniel buried himself in work, Claire in her world of appearances. Eleanor stopped asking for visits. She learned silence was easier than begging. But inside she kept every memory, like folded letters she couldn't throw away. She visited the attic that evening, her archive of yesterdays. Old party banners, children's drawings, a cracked balloon deflated years ago. She ran her fingers across each object, like reading Braille written by her own life. That's when she found it. An old birthday card from Daniel, written in crooked handwriting. To Mom, who makes everything special. She smiled, a small, painful smile. That night she wrote a letter, not to them, but to herself. I forgive them, she whispered as she wrote. But deep down she knew forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. She tucked the letter into a drawer beside her will notice. The first step toward something she hadn't felt in years. Control. Control. The next morning felt different. Not lighter, not happier, just clear. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with her tea, staring at the letter from Mr. Fletcher. For years, she had waited for someone to remember her. Now it was her turn to remember herself. The thought scared her and thrilled her. Maybe this was what freedom looked like, even if it came late. She folded the letter neatly into her purse and stood up with purpose. Today, she would call the lawyer. Mr. Fletcher's voice on the phone was calm and familiar. He'd handled her husband's estate years ago, and in his measured tone she found comfort. "Of course, Eleanor," he said. "We can make any changes you wish." His words lingered. Any changes? She paused before replying. "Then it's time I make a few." When she arrived at Mr. Fletcher's office, the air smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. He greeted her with a warm handshake, his eyes kind but knowing. She sat opposite him, her posture straight, her hands clasped. "I want to make some changes," she said. He nodded slowly, sensing the weight behind her calmness. For the first time in years, she felt like the one steering her life, not waiting for anyone else to notice. They spent hours reviewing her will as she listed names, people who had been kind when her own family hadn't. Her voice grew steadier. The gardener who fixed her fence without charge, the nurse who checked on her every Sunday. "You're certain about this?" Mr. Fletcher asked softly. Eleanor smiled, her eyes warm but firm. "I've never been more certain of anything." As she left the office, rain began to fall. Gentle, forgiving rain. She didn't rush for cover. Each drop felt like a quiet baptism, washing away 10 years of waiting. By the time she reached her car, she was soaked, but smiling. Somewhere deep within her, something had shifted. The woman who once waited for calls was gone. The woman who made decisions had just been born. It started with a rumor. A cousin mentioned Eleanor had been updating her papers. Within a week, Daniel called, his first call in nearly 2 years. His voice sounded cautious, like a man testing thin ice. "Hey, Mom? I was just thinking about you." She smiled faintly at the irony. After 10 birthdays of silence, now he remembered. She answered softly, "That's nice, Daniel." "I was just thinking about you too." The truth was, she had been just not the way he imagined. 2 days later, Claire appeared, unannounced, perfumed, and smiling too brightly. She hugged Eleanor tightly, too tightly, like she was trying to squeeze a decade of absence into a single gesture. "You look amazing, Mom," she said, voice sugary. Eleanor's arms remained loosely around her daughter. "Do I?" she replied softly, eyes steady. That night, Claire scrolled through her phone, pretending to be interested in old photo albums. But Eleanor saw it. That restless glance toward the envelope on the desk. They began visiting more often after that. Daniel brought flowers he didn't know the names of. Claire brought cakes she didn't bake. The house filled again with sound, but not warmth. Every laugh felt hollow, every gesture rehearsed. Eleanor played along, smiling where she should, nodding when expected. Inside, she counted every insincere word like beads on a rosary of disappointment. That night, after they left, Eleanor walked through her quiet house, touching the backs of chairs they'd sat on, hearing their laughter echo faintly in her mind. But it wasn't real, just noise. The emptiness afterward felt almost cleaner, purer, like the truth had aired out the lies. She poured herself a small glass of wine and toasted the silence. "To family," she whispered, her voice heavy with something between love and letting go. Days turned into weeks, and the visits continued. The calls, the gifts, the sudden interest, all predictable, all hollow. One evening, after another cheerful goodbye, Eleanor opened her journal and began to write again. "They came back when they thought I had something left to give." She paused, smiled faintly, and added, "But what they never understood. I already gave them everything." For the first time in 10 years, Eleanor decided to celebrate her birthday. But this time, the invitation wasn't for joy. It was a stage, and she knew her actors would come running. She sent each of her children a handwritten note, simple and warm. Dinner at my place. Saturday, 7 p.m. It would mean the world. Within hours, both replied, eager, almost desperate. That night, she set the table herself, polished the silver and placed 3 candles at its center. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but anticipation. The performance was about to begin. Daniel arrived first, cologne thick, grin practiced. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said too loudly, holding a wrapped bottle of wine. Moments later, Claire followed, equally polished, equally false. The hugs came quickly, the small talk quicker. Eleanor smiled, her eyes calm, detached. As they settled at the table, she looked at the 2 faces that once meant everything to her, and realized she no longer needed their approval, only their understanding. Dinner began like a dance of politeness. Compliments, laughter, old stories they barely remembered. But under each word lay unease. "We should do this more often," Claire said, glancing at Daniel. Eleanor smiled faintly. "We used to," she replied. Silence followed, heavy, delicate. She lifted her glass, eyes steady. "To family and to remembering what we've forgotten." Daniel's smile faltered first. Claire looked down at her plate. The air thickened. After dessert, she stood and walked to her cabinet. From the top drawer, she pulled out a stack of envelopes, 2 of them sealed, 1 for each child. "Before you go," she said softly, placing them on the table, "I wanted to give you something." Daniel frowned. "What's this?" Eleanor smiled, that same gentle smile she wore when tucking them into bed decades ago. "A reminder," she said. "Something to remember me by." Neither spoke. The candles flickered, reflecting unease across their faces. They left soon after, their goodbyes clumsy, forced. Eleanor watched their car lights vanish into the night, the sound of the engine fading like the last line of a song she no longer cared to hear. Alone again, she returned to the dining room, now silent except for the steady hiss of candle flame. She exhaled slowly, then whispered, "Happy birthday, Eleanor." But this time, it wasn't sorrow. It was peace. She'd finally celebrated herself. A month later, the house stood silent again, its walls heavy with memory. Then came the phone calls, one after another. Daniel's voice cracked when Mr. Fletcher told him the news. Claire wept into the receiver, not out of grief, but disbelief. Their mother was gone, peacefully in her sleep. For the first time in years, they felt something real. But it wasn't love. It was fear. Fear of what she might have left behind or taken with her. The day of the will reading arrived like a storm disguised in silence. They dressed in black, elegant, rehearsed, and drove together, saying little. Inside the office, the ticking clock felt deafening. Mr. Fletcher greeted them with the same calm warmth he'd always shown Eleanor. "Your mother was very clear in her wishes," he began. Neither child noticed the tremor in his voice when he opened the envelope. Her voice echoed through the room as Mr. Fletcher read her handwritten letter. "To my children, Daniel and Claire, you were my greatest joy once, then my greatest lesson." Their faces stiffened. "I leave you the memories of every moment we could have shared, and chose not to." A pause hung in the air. "My home, my savings, and all I own shall go to those who remembered me, not for what I had, but who I was." Claire's breath caught. Daniel's hands clenched. Mr. Fletcher continued gently, "A portion of my estate will fund scholarships for young caregivers in memory of my nurse, Nora." Claire's eyes darted up. "Who?" she whispered, voice trembling. "The one who held my hand when you could not," Mr. Fletcher read. Silence fell, deep, suffocating. The lawyer's voice softened on the final line. "And finally, I ask only this. Remember me, not for what you lost, but for what you left behind." When they left the office, the afternoon sun was blinding. Daniel walked ahead, jaw tight, anger simmering behind silence. Claire trailed behind, mascara streaking as she whispered, "She really forgot us." But Eleanor hadn't forgotten. She had remembered them perfectly. Every year, every silence, every absence. And in the end, she gave them exactly what they gave her. Nothing. Weeks passed. The house was emptied, sold, boxed, and erased, at least to those who never looked beyond the walls. But somewhere else, a small-town library received a letter and a donation from the late Eleanor Ward. Inside the envelope was her note. For the ones who still remember the lonely, the librarian, eyes misting, whispered her name softly, as if speaking to a ghost who had finally found peace. The scholarship Eleanor founded began that same year. Young caregivers, nurses, and social workers applied, people who had given compassion freely, without expectation. Nora stood on stage at the ceremony, holding back tears as she spoke Eleanor's name. "She reminded me," Nora said, voice trembling, "that kindness isn't small, it's eternal." The audience rose in quiet applause, though most had never met the woman they were honoring. Daniel and Claire visited the grave months later, not together, but on the same day. They stood on opposite sides of the tombstone, the silence between them heavier than the years they'd wasted. Her name, carved in marble, seemed to whisper back their own guilt. Claire placed a single lily. Daniel muttered something that sounded like, "I'm sorry." But the wind carried their words away, like confessions meant for no one. That night, Daniel sat in his apartment, scrolling through old photos. Each image was a reminder of what he'd traded for ambition. The dinners missed, the calls ignored. Across the city, Claire did the same, staring at her phone, waiting for a message that would never come. For the first time in years, they both felt the same thing. Not anger, not regret, but emptiness. A silence too deep to fill, but somewhere, in that quiet absence, Eleanor's candle still burned. Not in the house she left behind, but in every act of kindness her memory inspired. In the nurse who checked on an old neighbor, in the child who wrote a birthday card for their grandmother. Her story wasn't one of revenge. It was of remembrance. A woman forgotten by her family, yet remembered by the world she quietly healed. And if you listened closely, you could almost hear her voice, soft as the flicker of flame. "For 10 years you forgot my birthday. For the rest of your lives, you'll remember this one."